Is there an introduction or I go straight? You don't have to do an introduction, I just wasn't sure. Okay.
I can improvise something from the heart.
Oh, something from the heart. Okay, something from this heart. Okay, all right, we're good.
Okay, hello everyone. May we have a bit of a silence. We're going to start today's show and presentation with Anita Nowak. So today she's going to talk about empathy and social change. And we, as Nourish, wanted to bring this teacher here because she's the one in McGill that touched us the most, that has the most powerful message, but not only a message that she says, but a message that she lives. And so we wanted to try to share this message with you guys that do not know Anita yet. So if we can give a big round of applause for Anita.
I'm super delighted to be here, and I actually want to just put it out there that I've got butterflies, which doesn't typically happen when I talk about stuff that is my passion project, and I've been talking about this for years. But I was expecting like a smaller group given the time of year, even though Octave was like, no, there's going to be a packed house, and I'm like, no, there isn't on Thursday in like mid-November. And not only are there students here tonight when you could be drinking beer out there, right? They're having like a beer party, as we know. But there's also members of the general public, and I was just catching up with a friend that I haven't seen in years who biked all the way from NDG, and her hands are freezing to be here. And I'm like, okay, I got to really just like lift my game up. So here goes. Octave said empathy and social change, and I felt it kind of important to add the qualifier of positive social change because it may not go that way sometimes, right? So I'm on that side of things, and I go by she and her. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on very special land that is taken care of and stewarded by our First Nations. So I just want to acknowledge that. So, in case you haven't noticed, empathy is on fire, okay? Empathy is everywhere. I've been studying it for nearly a decade, but now it's everywhere. These are some books that are on my shelf that I read doing my PhD, which I finished in 2011, and now I'm working on my own book, and I've mapped out the recent books on the market about empathy to sort of differentiate where mine's at. So it's growing, and here's one, Applied Empathy, that a gentleman is coming in from New York to speak at a talk on Saturday about empathy. And I have an Empathic Action Facebook page, and today's post was 1182. So for 1,182 days consecutively, I've been posting about empathy, and I'm never short of stories. And so can empathic concern increase political polarization is today's story, with, of course, a very familiar hat that I don't love. But here you go. In Georgia, where they don't even speak English or have the same alphabet, this is where I bought my t-shirt, Make Empathy Great Again, this summer. So empathy is kind of like a buzz thing right now, which really makes me happy. It's also, obviously it's important to psychology, and it's important to neuroscience, and it's important to education and behavioral stuff. A lot of places people are studying empathy, but now business schools are studying empathy, which I love, because they're looking at how empathy increases social capital among teams, and social capital increases innovation. That's great. And of course, empathy is a huge part of design thinking, right? So a little example of how important empathy is to the business world if you go through the lens of design thinking. This is, I'll give you a little case story that comes straight out of that book, Applied Empathy, that I had a slide up about 2 seconds ago. And that is GE, right? Huge multinational, employs tens of thousands of people around the world, billions of dollars of sales, right? They hired a company to actually, like a consulting company, to say, we have these mammography machines and we want to sell more of them. So can you help us with that? And the design company had 4 months to think about how they could provide some feedback to GE on how to sell more of these machines under the condition that they couldn't change any of the specs. So the machines had to stay exactly as is. And so what do you do with that? So typically in design thinking, one of the first steps is you have to empathize. Step 1 is empathize, right? which is, you know, code for like, let's get to know the people who are using your product or your service, right? Let's understand what their needs are, what their pain points are. So of course they went to, instead of, and given that these machines are being sold to hospitals and health clinics, you could think maybe the user is the people, the administrators that are buying these machines. But in fact, they went to speak to the women who are having the mammograms. And what they discovered is that, anybody want to take a guess what women were complaining about as a pain point for like mammograms? That they hurt, okay? Ouch, they're painful. And the design company like heard that over and over and over again, but guess what? They couldn't change the specs. But the second thing that they were hearing about is that the women didn't like the waiting room before the mammograms, like cold, sterile places where you're already nervous because who knows what the results are going to be. So long story short, the design company said, we're going to change the experience of that waiting room for the women, and that's going to sell GE more machines. So they actually, this design company went to Victoria's Secret, no joke, to actually help them design the kind of waiting room that women might feel a little bit less stressed about. And these were the kinds of rooms that the design company pitched to GE, and of course the GE board is like, how's that going to sell us more mammograms? But they bought into it, and guess who's selling more mammograms? Guess whose market share has just exploded in the machine business? So empathy is showing up in business world, and even more what I'm excited about is even the World Economic Forum is paying attention to empathy. I was just really thrilled to learn this just like 2 weeks ago. So the annual Shapers is the name that they give to this cohort of youth between the ages of 20 and 30. There's about 800 chapters globally of global shapers. So Montreal has a chapter, there's 30 global shapers, and they are invited to attend the World Economic Forum. And one of the things that they discovered is shapers agreed with Klaus Schwab that a leader cannot achieve greatness without deep empathy towards others. It's the most important sentiment to fight for. And when they did like a gathering of young shapers to talk about empathy, they really are investing quite a little bit of time. This is like now a diagram that the shapers are offering the World Economic Forum as a model to think about empathy in terms of, you know, business and leadership for the future. So I find that kind of fascinating. Okay, so that's just sort of like to establish why I'm here. But here's, I want to establish how to be here. So I want this to be, it's going to be highly experiential, so I'm not just going to be talking at you. We're going to do some things with peacock feathers and other fun stuff. And at any point in time, you can ask a question of clarification. We can have a debate. You guys can debate each other. I'm totally open for all of that. But I'm really going to be making my way through a deck, like a long deck, but it'll go fast, about what empathy is, why, and why it's important to social change. Are we good? Sound good? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. Could somebody kill the lights, like just put them down? And I'm going to get the music queued up. And as you watch these images, I want you to think about why I'm starting my presentation with them. So just take a moment and think about a word that evoked for you. Yeah.
Soothing.
Soothing. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Interesting.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah. Peaceful. Yeah.
I was going to say that.
Peaceful. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love.
Love.
Majestic.
Majestic. Yeah.
Colorful.
Pardon me?
Colorful.
Colorful. Yeah.
Non-human.
Non-human. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All of nature. Yeah. Some really positive things, eh? All that diversity, all that absolutely stunning array of colors and shapes and sizes and beautiful, right? So I predicted a few words, right? Hi, welcome. We're happy you're here. Come, join us. So, there's lots going on in the world. There's so much beauty in the world. And yet, this is some of what we're up to. Right? So, it pains me a little bit more and more because I have a 3.5-year-old daughter now. And I'm starting to really ask the existential question of what in the world she'll see as she grows up, what she'll miss out on, what will be her fate and her cohort's fate, right? You'll live it, your children, your grandchildren, like what's going on? But let's go back. Let's acknowledge some of our awesomeness, okay? So typically I'll put on like a timer for a minute and I'll invite students to like for 60 seconds write everything that they can think of. Do you want to do this? Should we do it? Or should I just tell you about it? Want to do it? Want to do it? Okay, so whip out a piece of paper and pen or pencil. All right, so the instructions are pretty easy. Sorry, I'm not easy for you, eh? I'm wandering around. You're just capturing the audio? Okay, fine. Ready? Okay, so the goal is to write as many things that you can think of in 60 seconds that humans invented. They could be products, they could be services, they could be institutions, but things that exist as a result of humans having created them. Off you go. Ten seconds left. Okay, stop. Pencils down, pencils down. Okay, so now you put up your hand if you have 10 or more on your list. Put up your hand if you have 10 or more. Keep it up if you have 11 or more. Keep it up if you have 12, 13, 14, 15. Great, your list. Let's hear it.
National. National. Health Service.
National Health Service. Yep, go for it.
Schools, books,
Yep, go for it.
schools, books, schools, books, schools, books, schools, books, schools, books, schools,
And what's the last one?
Like heating.
Heating. Sure. Okay, awesome. Anybody dying to share something that humans invented that's on your list and you're like really proud that it's on your list? No? No. Okay, so I'm going to start with a basic premise that I think humans are awesome. We've done some pretty awesome things. We've invented some pretty awesome things. So this is not a let's get down on our species kind of talk, okay? Rather just the opposite. I think it's really awesome that humans have cracked the genome. Like that's, I think, a pretty amazing feat. I think it's pretty extraordinary that we are inventing machines that can think faster and can calculate faster than our own brains can, although there's a whole whack of ethical things that we'll get to in a second. But AI is coming. I think it's cool that we've been able to get the math on that. And we've gone to space, right? We've gone to the moon. We're thinking about going to Mars. We're pretty awesome as a species go. So sticking with the outer space theme for a second, I'd like to invite my students. So I'm imagining all of us together. We're all like creatures like this, and we're all together on a spaceship, and we've traveled several light years through the whatever solar systems, many solar systems to get to planet Earth. And here we are. We're very quiet and we're very surreptitious, but we're like hanging out on planet Earth on November 7th, 2019 to collect some data points. So these are just a few data points. This is bias on purpose. Okay, I know this is not comprehensive. But let's be honest that right now the income inequality is such that 8 people on the planet have the same combined wealth as the bottom half of the world's population. So 3.5 billion people, when you add up everything that they own and their combined wealth, 8 people have that same amount of money. So you have to ask yourself, like, how are things getting distributed? So some people live very luxuriously and billions of people do not. And some people eat very luxuriously, but the estimates, depending on the year, are anywhere from 1 to 6 or 1 out of 9. So if I were to just take an average of, let's say, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 out of 7 people on the planet, including children, do not have enough food to eat to sustain life. And yet there's how many metric tons of food that's being destroyed and not being shared and being like thrown away. All the countries on the planet have officially abolished slavery and that it's unlawful activity. And yet the International Labor Organization estimates that roughly about 27 million people on the planet are currently held against their will in bonded labor or being trafficked for sex or working in very, very difficult conditions. Even the estimate is about 100,000 children are serving as child soldiers right now on our watch. And that 27 million people is 3 times the number of people who were exploited during the 300-year African slave trade. 3 times the number right now on our watch. And then there's 1 billion people that don't have access to sanitation facilities, that do not have a toilet to use for their purposes. And you can imagine what that means for health. And safe drinking water is an issue for 1 billion people on the planet. And then, of course, there's like the meta problem of climate change and the problem that it's wreaking on society all across the globe all the time now. It's not like it's all the time now. And this is happening in the West, and the people who have the least are going to be the ones that are going to face the greatest impact of that. So the question is, or the statement at least is, well, that's who we are as people. We got to hear greed, self-interest, human nature. That's who we are. That's why we're here, right? So maybe if we were all aliens doing some anthropological research and we came across all those data points, we would say, what? What would we say about humans if these were the data points that were collected? Again, I recognize that they're fully biased, but I'm trying to make a point. What would they say?
I don't think think they would say much. They would throw a bomb right away.
They would try to demolish us, get rid of us. Like they're like a microbe. What is it? Like a disease-infested planet. Like not good for the organism, right? They might treat us like cancer. You're right. We would be. What else? What do you think they would say? Like think about it for a second. You're coming onto planet Earth, and this is like the reality check. This is not bullshit. This is happening. So what would they say? Yeah.
It's a dying planet. It's not a sustain.
It's a completely unsustainable model. Completely unsustainable. 100%. Yeah.
We are so intelligent yet, what a pity.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, wow, how could they be so intelligent and yet make so many mistakes that are like colossal suicide, you know, like they're jumping off a deep end. Yeah, what else? Yeah. Go ahead. Insanity. Yeah. Kind of, right? And yet we're like super advanced, right? Okay. Now, some people are absolutely convinced that human nature is self-interested, okay? And that has become part of our cultural lore. In large part, we can trace this back to some thinking about this guy. Who can tell me who this guy is? Adam Smith, right? And what is Adam Smith known for? Anybody want to take a stab? Yeah? Libertarian ideas? Yeah, I'm not even sure if I know enough about libertarian ideas to confirm that. It's possible. You might be right. I don't know. Yeah?
The invisible hand of the market?
Yeah, the invisible hand. You heard of that expression, the invisible hand? And the theory of the invisible hand basically says if everybody acts in their own self-interest, aggregately, it'll all work out for everyone. That's the bottom line of that theory. And that's the theory that took fire. Everybody got excited about, and the entire market economy is built on that assumption. Yet, Adam Smith wrote a second book, besides The Wealth of Nations, in which he describes the invisible hand theory, a second book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is like the understudy, right? The underdog book, which talked about others' interest. So, Wealth of Nations, self-interest, the theory of moral sentiments, others' interest. He just basically noticed among his peers of the time that we do things for other people without expecting anything in return, and we're not really sure why we're altruistic, but it's part of who we are, right? Does this kind of resonate? Isn't that part of who we are too? So if we fast forward a few hundred years, a gentleman by the name of Frans de Waal, who's a primatologist from the Netherlands, has spent some time studying bonobos and is debunking what our human nature is all about. This is a picture of a chimpanzee, okay? And this is a picture of a bonobo. And if in a week's time I put up one or the other, you wouldn't be able to tell me which is the chimp or which is the bonobo. Neither would I, okay? They look similar, okay? But the interesting part of the chimp and the bonobo story is that the chimp story tells us that we are violent and hierarchical by nature, prone to war, right? After many decades of studying chimpanzees, we believe they have some behaviors that are very similar to humans, right? So humans are descendants, so therefore, like, it's in our nature. Frans de Waal has studied bonobos instead and has discovered that they are very loving and cooperative and nurturing and kind, and says, hey, if we'd spend as much time studying bonobos as we have chimpanzees, we'd have a different conception of what human beings are. And what I find interesting, because we share a lot of the bonobo in us, and I find it interesting when I discovered this. It was kind of mind blowing. The chimp and humans have more in common in terms of our DNA, and the bonobos have more in common with humans in terms of our DNA than they have with each other. Okay? But in our culture, the story that is celebrated is the chimp story. right? Competitive by nature, brutal, militaristic, all that kind of fun stuff. And maybe it's time to elevate the bonobo story. So, I ask, what is empathy? What is empathy?
Putting yourself in other people's shoes.
Yes, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. We've heard that before, right? We know that expression. What else? How would you define empathy? What's coming to mind? Yeah,
Caring for others.
caring for others. Sure, love it. Yep,
Connecting with someone at a deeper level than the physical occurs.
sure, like an intrinsic connection. Yeah, yeah. Like transcendent of the outer identity. Yeah, sure, I buy that. Anything else? Yep.
Being able to feel with someone what they're feeling.
Yeah, feeling what someone else is feeling. Sure, right. So what you've shared is sort of what commonly comes up. Empathy is stepping into someone else's shoes, or seeing through someone else's eyes, or feeling what someone else is feeling, right? I want to offer the working definition that I use is that empathy is the innate trait that unites us in our shared humanity, with a little asterisk that says that we don't deny or negate lived experience, right? So we all live different lives, but empathy is what unites us. We all have one thing in common, and that is we're living as human beings. So there are 4 things that I want to share with you about empathy, and then I'll get into why I think it's so important for social change as a bedrock. We're good so far? Any questions so far? No? Are we getting into a good place, or are you kind of tuning out? What's happening with you guys? We're still good? Yeah? Thumbs up? Yeah.
One question.
Sure.
I've often been confused between the definition of empathy and compassion.
Great. We're coming to that. You're about 6 slides ahead of me. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions? We're good to go? All right. Number 1. There are 2 things that make up empathy. One is cognitive empathy, which is your capacity to think what someone else is thinking. It's perspective taking. So when you're sitting and having a conversation with a friend who's telling you a story, and you're really like imagining what the situation is like for that person without actually having direct experience with it, you are activating your cognitive empathic proclivity, right? Your cognitive empathy. And what does a really good job of engaging your cognitive empathy? Literature, fiction. You read a good story, you get into the characters, you're imagining what they're experiencing. There's actual real science that shows the more fiction you read, the more empathic you become. Of course, the corollary is maybe more empathic people choose to read more fiction, so that's still a bit of a debate. So we know that there's one part of empathy, which is the cognitive part. It has to do with our brains. The second part is affective empathy, which has to do with our heart. We don't control when we have affective empathy. We control when we engage our cognitive empathy, but affective empathy is natural. So I will prove this to you by inviting you to look at some images with me. So, engage with me, okay? I want you to not look at me, I want you to look at the screen, and I will reflect back what I see in the room. Most of you are smiling, right? It's called emotional contagion. Your brain recognizes this joy, and your face naturally curves up. You don't control that. Now watch what happens. It's harder to smile when you see an image like that, right? And that's because we have mirror neurons. Our mirror neurons fire when we see something that we know is possible for us to experience. Our brain experiences it as if it was happening to us because we recognize the emotion. Yeah?
Why do we laugh then when someone, I don't know, falls and it makes us laugh?
Yeah, that's a different kind of thing. I mean, there's a bit of Schadenfreude there. I mean, it depends on who's falling. Are they, like, did they hurt themselves? The context. So, yeah. That's a little bit more of a complicated scenario. But I'll let you do this again, all right? So if you look at this image, you're feeling parasympathetic feelings, like, sympathetic joy with this child. And as a trigger warning, if you want to shut your eyes, it's not possible to look at this image, especially if the lights were dimmed and you'd see the facial expression of the boy, to smile during this image. And so now I want to neutralize you, not neutralize you, but like neutralize the feelings by showing you some lovely cat pictures, and for the dog people in the room, you got one too. Okay, so our brain is reacting empathically all the time. Okay, it's got a lot of stimulus to react to. So that was the first thing about empathy: cognitive empathy, affective empathy. The third thing I'd like you to know, so I'm going to count down from 4, 3, 2, 1, is getting to your question. Through my research, I discovered that there's a lot of words that are treated as synonyms, but they don't mean the same thing. And I put them on what I called an altruistic emotion continuum. And on one side, you've got pity, sympathy, compassion, empathy. And pity, that side of the continuum, is you are definitely looking down on somebody. There's a power differential when you pity someone. Oh, you poor person, right? That means like, you know, oh, poor person. There's do you understand what I'm saying by this like power differential? And, you know, some philanthropy, some foreign aid is predicated on this like, oh, poor handout situation. But as you make your way across the continuum, I feel when you're empathizing with someone, you recognize that you share a common humanity. So I could look at anybody in this room and we could have a moment together, and I could say what we have in common is that we're both human. And regardless of circumstance, anywhere on the planet, two people have that in common. And when you empathize, it's that recognition that we share a common humanity. And there are certain things that happen. We're all born, we all die, and everything in between that happens gives us, you know, it's the life that we have and what we share in common. So empathizing is that we share that common humanity, and that's what makes it different. Compassion, if I just go back just to make the to answer the question explicitly, compassion is when you feel what someone else is feeling, but you don't necessarily have the cognitive empathy activated. Empathy is when both, they could happen simultaneously, one or the other, but empathy encompasses both capacities. Compassion does not. Compassion is a feeling. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. All right, number 2, we are all born with the capacity to empathize. There are some very small percentage of people who are not. And there's debates about, you know, whether it's people on sort of the one spectrum, far on this autism spectrum, like what their relationship to empathy is. Of course, the most obvious are the true psychopaths of the world do not empathize. There's also debates about the fact that they can empathize because they can imagine what somebody else is doing and then they still do something nasty, but they don't actually have affective empathy. So there's something in their neural circuitry. So you're born to empathize, and you continue to cultivate empathy throughout time based on circumstances in your life, and I'm going to get to that in a minute when I go to number 1. But the one little anecdote I wanted to share is that there's actually like developmental milestones that people go through as they get older. And the anecdote that I like to share about my daughter, when she was just a couple of months old, we were walking and she was in a stroller, and we passed another mom with a baby in the stroller, and that kid was like having a complete and utter meltdown. And my child, when she got close enough, I was watching this, like I was like, for me as an empathy researcher, I was like, this is gonna be awesome. My daughter, right on cue, burst into tears when she like became conscious of this other kid crying, and I'm like, right on. Because by 3 months, your emotional contagion, empathic capacity kicks in and then grows over time. How does it grow over time? Well, that's the last thing I want to let you know, is that you can actually become more empathic with practice, and it's not just a female thing. So the way I try to describe that is through the metaphor of walking across a field of snow, which I know we're all really looking forward to doing over the next few months, next 8,000 months. So you're a kid, and it's February, big dump of snow, and this is a football field, and you have to cross it to get to school, right? So if you're the first kid, you're at the base of this, and you're walking, you have the hard job, right? You're like making your way through the snow, right? What happens if you're the typical next kid? You walk in their path, right? Okay, so that's how paths get created. And that's exactly, I work at McGill, and I'm always afraid there's like a neuroscientist in the room because they're going to complicate this slide, but that's the way our brain works too, okay? These are neural networks that exist, and the more often you have an experience or a thought, the thicker the synaptic connection becomes, just like that path. So what I like to say is if you're a child that's born in a family where the household is full of strife and you're getting yelled at all the time and worse, you are going to grow up and your brain is going to be neurologically different than a child who was raised in a family full of love and support. And if we take not the two extremes of that, if you have, let's say, just you're a kid and you grew up and your family's all, your mom, dad, you're always yelling at you, you're not good, no. Your brain, to like actually protect you as a human organism, will grow to have some defense mechanisms, right? So you'll either be sarcastic or you'll develop some habits, some behaviors to protect yourself. And over time, those will become reflexes. And so if you've met some defensive people in your life as adults, I would wager that they had some hardship growing up, because the kids that have lots of love and support, their brains are a little bit more open-spirited, and sort of they see, people under good light to start as a starting point. So brains evolve based on thoughts and behaviors that you're exposed to over a lifetime. But the interesting thing about the brain is that the brain is plastic. There's really fabulous research on brain plasticity, which shows that you, based on your own thinking, you don't even have to behave differently, you just have to think differently. You can change the neural pathways in your brain, and you can change your behavior and the reflexes you have. You just start thinking differently, and you start creating new neural pathways and new synaptic connections. And I find that very, very empowering to know how much we actually can control in terms of our neural plasticity. So with that in mind, I thought it would be fun to do some empathy exercises. So there's a couple of things that I need to know in advance, because we haven't gotten into the social change part. Are we ready to do some empathy exercises? It'll maybe take like 10 minutes. I want to see a show of hands if you're into this. Otherwise, I'll carry on. Great. Okay, so let's start with 3 steps, okay? There may not be enough, but please take one and then stand in this open space, okay? Maybe I need like 20 people to do this, okay? Just take one and come join me over here, up at the front. Okay, so spread yourself out, take up all the real estate because you're going to need it, okay? Don't like be too close to somebody. Have elbow room, okay? So move your body around until there's enough space. You're spread out. So you all have space. I don't see people really following the instructions too well. So move to the extremes of the room to provide space for yourself, okay? All right. Good, good, good. Now, everybody in the room is going to be quiet for this, and the goal is not to hold the base like in such a way that you're squeezing it tight, but I actually want you to let yourself hold it up until you're kind of in a meditative trance with your feather, and that means moving around. That means if you have to go outside for space, you do it just for like a minute or two. And the goal, as you're doing this in silence, so really treat this as a bit of a spiritual opportunity. I want you to think of metaphors for life. Okay, what does this experience tell you about life? Off you go. when you feel you have a metaphor, you can put your feather back in the pot. And take a seat. Awesome, thank you. Okay. Now, with your indulgence, okay, we'll get you guys sorted out. Can I take this? Thank you. Go a little faster. Thank you. All right, have a seat, guys. We started a little bit late. Are we comfortable to go to 7:30? Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, I understand if some people have to leave, that's okay. Anybody want to share what their metaphor was? Yeah.
It was mostly about the volatility of life, not knowing where you're going, just letting yourself go with the flow.
Right, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
I was thinking about this guy in the circus that goes on a
Tightrope.
yeah, and yeah, has to balance between different things around him in life and choose the one that he wants to follow.
Right. So you were feeling like really like the fragility almost of life, right? Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm hearing.
Balancing and selecting.
Making choices, right? That impact which way you may fall or stay up, right? Okay, got it. Yeah. Right. Seems so tough when you're doing it, and yet everybody else is having the same struggle. How interesting. That's a good one. Yeah, there's three. You know what I'm sensing? Oh, I'm glad, because I was just going to say this side of the room is winning on the engagement level. So you guys, have some work cut out for you for the rest of the evening. Otherwise, I'll just stay here for the rest of the night, okay? Go ahead.
I didn't do it. I was like an onlooker, but like something I noticed is like there was so many people, but everyone kind of stayed in their little circle and respected the fact that other people were struggling around them
Uh-huh.
because they were all doing the same task.
Sure. So nice to have actually witnessed some
Before we
respect.
started it was like a whole bunch of people just
Uh-huh.
kind of competing for like a peak of feather. And
Yeah.
Once they started, everyone kind of.
Got into synchronicity, like a
Yeah.
school of fish. Nice. Okay. Well, who else had? Yeah.
But like the more you did it, the more you practiced, the more you expected, and the more it was where it was going, and the more it didn't go where you wanted it to go.
So you felt synchronicity with the feather?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Yes.
The harder you push, the more erratic it became. So that kind of felt like something.
Yeah. Which kind of the corollary being like the more easygoing and letting it flow, the easier it became. How interesting. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Also, the more you try to look at other people doing it, the harder it was for yourself.
Right. So like, right. Don't check out the other, just be present for what is for you, right? So many metaphors. Okay, let's take the last two and then we'll do the next exercise. Yeah.
I understand what it is that I'm talking about, but an exercise in moderation.
Exercise in moderation. Fair enough. Yeah.
Trial and error.
Trial and error.
As I did it more and more, I realized that everything's wrong and everything fixed it.
Sure. And are there any kind of metaphors that relate to empathy from this experience in terms of each other?
As in with the other people doing the same exercise?
I don't know anything about the exercise at all that gives you an insight into empathy. Doesn't have to be. Yeah.
Maybe like ensuring success, but also respecting other people's spaces.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sure. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm not anticipating something. Somebody taught me, and I should have a slide for this, but it's a scholar from Turkey that studied Islamic art, and she now lives in Washington, D.C., and she's a museum curator, and she's written a book about how museums can become public spaces for growing empathy among the public. And we had a long dialogue on the phone, and I said, what was it about Islamic art that turned you on to this notion of empathy? And she said, oh, that's easy. She's like, the circle. And I'm like, the circle? And so she told me, she's like, if you think about geometry, the really simplest version of geometry is two dots that are connected by what is known as a line. And if you add a third dot, guess what happens? Right? And on and on and on and on. And she said you could add infinite number of dots, and it could be connected into every geometrical shape you can imagine, right? All of those, everything you can imagine. But if you push those out to their extremes, you end up with a circle, right? If you push those out all to the extremes, they end up in the shape of a circle. So a circle encompasses all shapes known to man. And she said, the epicenter is an interesting thing because anywhere on the circumference is equidistant to the center. And there are infinite number of points. So when you think about empathy, anybody on the circle is equidistant to source, whatever you want to define that as, and everybody's perspective counts, but they're just different. I find that kind of cool as a metaphor for empathy. So our second exercise is going to deepen our capacity to empathize, but requires just a little bit more vulnerability. So you're going to work in pairs, choose your partner, and sit in your chairs so that your shoulders are touching, not like touching, but like in parallel, but you're facing opposite directions. You're 180 degrees apart. So choose a partner and sit in that configuration, and I'll give you your next instruction. Okay, so you've got a partner. Does everybody have a partner? Who's missing a partner? Okay, so you're facing opposite directions, but your shoulders are kind of aligned. And the goal of this is, it's a listening exercise. So there's going to be person 1 and person 2, and you're both going to have a chance to do this. So person 1 is going to talk first for 1 minute about a nice day. A nice day you've had, a nice day you'd like to have. You wake up late, you have blueberry pancakes, yada, yada, yada. Okay, this is not like big vulnerability stuff. This is just tell us about a nice day, okay? And the person who's listening first, their job is to be really present for whatever the person 1 is talking about, and to notice, just be cognizant of how quickly your brain is going to take you to your thoughts, and that you're going to lose track of what your person is saying because you're going to be in your own head, okay? And then after the minute is done, I'm going to say stop and go very quickly, and the second person is going to speak, and the first person is going to listen. Those are the instructions. Are those clear, or are there any questions before we actually get going? Okay, so, and I'm going to observe what happens in the room as a result of this, and we'll have a little debrief, okay? So there's no talking between, like a back and forth. It's one person talking for 1 minute and then the next person talking. Okay, so off you go, starting now.
Very nice.
Yeah, you have the part? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, pleasure. looking at each other. Stop. Okay. Okay. So now we're just going to do a little debrief. Just a couple of minute debrief on what it was like to be the speaker and what it was like to be the listener, and then we'll move on to the third exercise before I start going through some more slides. So how was that to speak? Great, yeah? Fantastic? Good memories. It was nice to savor. Actually, positive psychology says that you enjoy your life more if you invest in savoring good memories than actually experiencing good memories, and that's all brain plasticity stuff. Yeah?
It was a little bit difficult to allocate the day along this 1 minute.
In 1 minute, oh yeah, because you were trying to get the whole day in, okay? Some people might have only been by noon, and you were like 9 p.m., you know? Yeah, okay, I get it. Tough, okay, yeah?
It was easier to listen.
Okay, let's hold tight on the listening. Let's just talk about the talking part for now, okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Speaking, what was that? What came up for you?
I think that obviously I was speaking with hand gestures, and I sort of forgot that the other person wasn't seeing me. So it was a bit pointless doing all of this, but it was difficult to speak without making those.
Yeah, who felt as the speaker that you were kind of, on one hand, maybe it felt nice to be listened to, but on the other hand, you're like talking into a vacuum, not really understanding or knowing.
Feedback.
No feedback, right? So what does that say about our need for visual cues to go with, so much of communication is the way we're interpreting body language and eye contact, right? So we were just paying attention to the story, listening in, right? Yeah?
I found it interesting because while I was talking, I was in my eyesight kind of zoned out.
Yeah.
Then when my partner was speaking, I found that my eyesight was very focused, but it moved different points.
Okay. You needed some place for your eyes, right? Yeah, and all of a sudden became conscious, like, where do I look when I don't have something to look at, right? Yeah. How about listening? What came up for you as a listener in the 1 minute? Did you find it, yeah?
I find it difficult not to give feedback and to try to let things express themselves without interacting.
So it was tough, right? You wanted to confirm or affirm a few things. Yeah, fair enough, yeah?
Kind of to go back on what you said about not being able to zone out, I kind of felt the opposite thing because he gave a lot of,
his description was a forest, so I was just imagining the forest like through his eyes, so I was completely zoned out on what I was watching, and I was just trying to visualize what he was telling me, so it was just kind of to read on what you said.
Yeah.
So no, I was completely invested in what he was saying, and really trying to live his memory as much as I could through it.
So you were savoring through his story,
Yeah.
right? Did you notice your brain ever go back to any of your own memories?
I guess when he said forest, it was probably a forest of my imagination or my memory, right?
Okay.
But nothing. I don't know. I just felt like
You didn't get distracted by
No,
your own
not
thoughts.
really.
Okay, that's great. For a minute, that's fantastic. Did you get distracted?
Yeah, I feel like for me, I would just start to think of my own memories it would just like be a cue to a memory that I kind of forgot about. That was like a happy memory for me that I would just think about through a little bit, and then we go back into the story.
Right, which is one of the reasons why we like dialogue so much and we like conversations, because we're listening, but we're also activating our own memories, and we're somehow synthesizing our own thoughts about our life through virtue of listening to somebody, right? Yeah?
You also kind of depended on how well you knew the person and how interesting they were saying was. Like obviously when it got really boring, I zoned out.
Must be a good friend of yours to say that. Okay, okay.
You know each other.
Yeah.
And that story, well, you know.
Right. But the point being that listening is not easy to do. We treat it as though it's easy, right? Because so much, like listening takes effort, because you might have somebody going through a boring patch and you just got to stick with it. Or when you're in a dialogue with somebody and all of your memories are being fired, you're not paying much attention, right? And when you're trying to empathize with somebody who's talking, you're relating to things from your own perspective, and some of what you want to say may not actually, necessarily align with what is needed at the time. And then what's even worse is if you're arguing with somebody, you're not listening at all. You are preparing what to answer in your head, right? Which is why so many conversations derail. Who wants to agree with me that what I'm saying is true, right? Yeah, whether it's with your family, your parents, your siblings, girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, whatever. When your emotions are charged, you're no longer able to listen. Okay, your brain has taken over. Your brain wants it to be about you. So there needs to be a big effort to listen, all right? So now we're going to do something that actually allows you to listen on a very deep level, but it requires even a little bit more vulnerability from you. Who's ready to do it? Exercise number 3. I have half buy-in. Okay, so anybody who wants to sit this out can, but you'll miss out. So that's all I'll say, okay? And it's your Thursday night you're giving up to be here. Might as well jump all in, right? So you'll either stay with your partner if you want, or you can choose another partner. That's up to you. But the first instruction is to sit facing each other with your knees planted on the ground. Knees or feet? Your feet. Feet planted on the ground. All right, the next instruction is you're sitting down, you're good? So you're facing each other, your knees are at kind of a 90-degree angle, and I want you to pay attention to the rest of your body language. Have you decided that you're like crossing your leg, or you're crossing your arm in front of your body? Maybe you're making the decision that you want to be as open to this experience as possible, where you have your hands on your lap facing up. Maybe. That I leave to you. Okay, so you can make that decision. Now I'm about to say something that this exercise is not the following. This is not a staring competition, okay? This is what we call a good old-fashioned eye-gazing experience. So you're gonna have 30 seconds to simply not talk. That's the only rule. You can laugh. Sometimes there'll be waves of laughter, and that'll happen, and that's okay. There'll be some giggle fests. And it's tough to do. What we are about to do is tough. So the more difficult this is, the more I invite you to really take this seriously, because you're going to learn a lot in a very short period of time. Okay? So 30 seconds, no staring, eye gazing, starting now with no talking. Good. Step 1 is over. All right. You can relax. You can look at me. Don't talk to each other for just a minute. Don't talk to each other for just a minute. Keep the energy. All right, you've shaken off a bit of nerves as a result. That's high intensity stuff. But part 2 is where the really exciting stuff happens, okay? Part 2 is you get to do this again for 90 seconds, okay? So triple the amount of time with 100. This is like a 10x experience, because if you let yourself do this, which requires, and the word I want to call your attention to is that you give yourself permission to like let go and surrender to the experience. You will experience a lot of stuff. It's kind of like being on ecstasy, but not, okay? So just try. See what comes up for you. See what you're noticing as difficult or easy. See how much you actually experience in 90 seconds, okay? Pay conscious attention to that. So 90 seconds, no talking, off you go now. You did it. All right. Bravo. Nicely done. Nicely done. Okay. So what came up for you during that experience? No right or wrong answers. This is just like, it is what it is. We're just sharing. Every experience is unique. No, we don't have to hear 3 of the same and that we believe that's the only thing that happened in the room. Sorry?
Vulnerability and exposure.
That's how you felt. You felt vulnerable and exposed. Exposed, does it have the connotation of like, too much information? Or exposed as in like, she saw me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you for being the first to speak about this. Yes.
Yeah, I think my opinion is biased because I know Thomas, but I think that why it worked for us is because at one point, it was very early in the exercise, we both accepted that we were playing the game, and so we both accepted we were exactly equally vulnerable to being exposed, and we just went deep in the eyes and stayed.
Can you say that you were not staring, but that you were actually eye gazing, like?
What's the difference exactly?
Well, a staring is like you're almost looking through somebody because you want to win the staring competition. Okay. Whereas when you're eye gazing, you're letting yourself be seen and you're seeing the person through the eyes of the soul. You know?
Yeah, I feel like I was more trying to maybe express an emotion or feel his emotion than actually. At first, I was like looking into his eyes and I was like, okay, like around the color or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like little by little, it was just more like, okay, well, what kind of message is he trying to like? I mean, how do I make him feel? I guess because he's only looking at me, and so whatever emotion he's gonna.
Who felt that they were expressing something, or that they were like in communication with a partner? Who felt that they were communicating with a partner? It's Good chunk of you, right? Isn't that cool? How were you communicating? How? Just by looking at each other. What were you communicating? What are some of the things? Yeah.
I feel like sometimes I would start to laugh a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but then I would kind of stop. But I feel like in the moment where I would stop, I was kind of trying to be like, or not trying to, but just being like, okay,
Uh-huh.
I don't need to be laughing. Like, I felt like sometimes I would laugh, but I didn't really feel like I needed to be laughing. And then I'd be like, okay. I just try to, I don't really know.
So your body was reacting to the fact that you're, like most of us are out of experience. We're not used to being that vulnerable. It takes a huge amount of vulnerability to do what you just did. And the laughter and the kind of self-consciousness that we feel is in direct proportion to how little we do this in our culture, right? And then you decided cognitively, I'm gonna let go. I'm gonna let go of this. I don't know why I'm giggling. I'm gonna just be present for it, right? Yeah? How many people feel like they like the person better that they did eye gazing with? For reasons you may or may not be able to explain. Wow, isn't that cool? Wow, think about that. Wow, we're on to world peace, folks. We're on to world peace. What else? What else came up? Yeah. Yeah. And that happened naturally, right? It's not as if you had to say like, okay, my real inclination is I want this person to feel like shit as they stare at me. No, your inclination was like, this is tough, and I'm going to have a facial expression that's as easy to look at so that this is taking away their discomfort, right? That's a bonobo trait, right? That's not a chimpanzee trait. The chimp would be doing the staring competition, and they do. What else came up? Yeah.
I just like thought it was extremely challenging to just like let the guard down and trust the other. And it was like for me it was really, like I know that my laughter is a defense mechanism even in my everyday life.
Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah.
But it's just like I just thought it was like very I don't know. And there's like a battle within you, you know, you really want to trust because you know even you know it's a person you know and you want to trust the person and you know he's trustworthy, but you know there's just like
Yeah.
there's something in you that's
Yeah, and part of that is just the culture we live in and the degree of mediated interaction we have, right? All of it is happening this way now. You're like super connected, but you're not connected, right? It's like mediated through a phone, and we're out of tune with something that is so fundamental to who we are as humans. So I will not go through the other slides that I had prepared because I feel like the conversation that needs to happen for these next 5 minutes before we say goodnight is, why is empathy important to social change and positive social change? Why is it fundamental to the kind of world we want to have? Yeah.
Because I think it deals with knowledge.
Deals with knowledge. Yeah? Tell me more.
Knowing the other,
Ah.
knowing what the other thinks, knowing how you're perceived by the other in a way as well.
Yeah.
Helps you. I feel like it would help you like have like a broader understanding.
Yeah,
of what
because
needs to be done in a good way.
Because when you use the word other, that's a big part of empathy literature. When you're a person over here and you're seeing somebody over here, whatever that means, that could be geographically, gender, age, doesn't matter, whatever, okay? That's an other to you. And it's empirically proven that the further away the other is, the less empathy you have, generally speaking, right? The closer you are to somebody, right? So friends will have an easier time empathizing, and that's how we have survived as a human species. That's how we evolved. If we didn't take care of each other in our little clans and we ostracized somebody, that's why we hate being rejected in our culture, because it's part of our DNA. Once we were rejected on the plains of wherever, it meant demise, it meant death. You were ostracized from your clan, you died, right? So this idea of taking care of each other and collaborating and caring and empathizing is a survival mechanism, right? As human beings, the closer you are. But the further out you go to the other, the less you can empathize. But what does that mean about how we're going to create change in the world? There's so many others than who we are, right? Yeah?
Or is it more in terms of bridging the gap between otherness and creating a certain cohesiveness
Right, right. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Yeah.
I just think that if you can't feel with or relate with the other person, you wouldn't be able to try and change. Just because everybody would pursue their own goals and then to feel just nothing would happen. So it's advisable to be able to feel with the other person.
Right. And I want to add the extra layer of the kind of algorithmic echo chambers we're living in where AI is figuring out, like, who knows? Okay, I'm telling you, right? What I wake up to in the morning is I watch some Stephen Colbert. So when I open up YouTube the next day, it's already queued for me, the next Stephen Colbert. You know that, right? Sometimes my daughter watches like Panda or Peppa or whatever. So I've got a big strange mix of things, but it knows what I'm looking for. Almost to the point where it's like, fuck, I want to hear something or see something different once in a while, but like, how do I find that thing? What am I going to go to, like a underground alt-right thing just to get some new stuff in my feed, right? But this is what's happening, is that we're perpetually living in echo chambers of people who are doing and thinking and writing and saying exactly what we already believe, which is just amplifying the fact that the other is like foreign to us, even though we are, like, in our culture where we have way more in common, right? But we just have like these opinions and ideologies that kind of keep us in this headspace of like, we know what's right, and anything else that's different from our thoughts is like othered. So what extra work has to happen given this circumstance? It's a reality that's not going away. If we're going to create any change in the world, if we're going to fight climate change, we're going to deal with income and inequalities, any of the things that the aliens thought we were crazy about, if we're going to address any of that, the root of all of that comes down to empathy. We've got to see each other as sharing the human experience. We've got to start seeing each other exactly as we're equal distance to we were all born from the same place. That's a fundamental philosophical, spiritual, and political way of behaving in the world. Right? It's not small stuff. Empathy is not for whiners. Empathy is not for lightweights. Right? So as we close things up, what's coming up for you? Any final thoughts or conclusions or takeaways or questions or, yeah?
Is it possible to get like immune to the horrors that we see constantly?
Yeah.
And that jeopardizes our capacity to actually feel.
Yeah. It's called compassion fatigue. It's a real thing where you can give, and you've exhausted yourself and you can't give any longer. So there's two kinds of examples. One that we all have experienced in this room and some who haven't, but I'll tell you anyways. For example, I'm an empathic person. I study empathy. I try to actively engage in what I call empathic action. I find empathic action opportunities all over the place. Still on my feed, there's only an endless supply of like where money is needed here. Or if I see, kids that have been put into like prisons south of the border that are coming over to basically, escape from war and all sorts of other things going on in Central America at the moment. Like kids in cages, I can't watch anymore. I just can't, because if I do, I can't survive. It pains me because I've got a daughter, right? So I just have to go through that, right? It's a compassion fatigue. So there's only so much that we can actually tolerate before it affects us. I remember meeting a guy. I spent a summer in Rwanda, and I was in the airport to fly to Kenya, and he was in the lineup from Britain, and he worked for a humanitarian organization that was giving frontline food on the lines in Sudan. So the organization was like a logistics company that was bringing all sorts of food from all different parts of the world to give out. And he said that it was impossible for anybody who was doing frontline service to treat anybody in those conditions with humanity. Because the minute you open the floodgate of caring for one person, you can't fucking do the work any longer, because you just see a sea of people who are begging for subsistence. And it's so hard to reconcile that, right? So you just have to kind of block it out and just go through the motions and give the food just to survive for the next day, because that's the humanitarian work. So yeah, it's a real thing. And the way to deal with that is to make sure that you take good care of yourself in order to serve again. So there has to be self-care in doing work that is social change work. There has to be. Otherwise, it's also not sustainable.
I'm wondering, how do you, as an empathy bodybuilder,
I'm going to update my LinkedIn profile with that. I'm an empathic bodybuilder. I love it.
and so how do you train your empathy muscle? Do you have like a particular technique? You just spend time, sit at a table, and think about what this other is, and come to the conclusion that he's as human as you are?
Yeah, so I'm a work in progress, and I will be a work in progress forever, okay? We're complicated human beings, so I'm gonna try to not sound like I'm on a soapbox professing how empathic I am and how you can all get there too, okay? Total work in progress, fail all the time, I'm rude to people, I'm like, I'm a complicated human being. But when I started studying empathy and understanding that you could become more empathic with practice, I was like, okay, I'm going to test this out. So the first simple thing that I did was I'm going to test out the pay it forward method. The time I owned a car, the time I would go through a Tim Hortons drive-through, and if it was under $5, the person behind me, because that was my budget, if it was under $5, I paid it forward, okay? And I remember in the early days of this experiment, looking in the rearview mirror till the person, my car would go ahead, and I'd see the car behind pull up and get the freebie and smile, and I would be like, nice, and then I'd drive off, and sometimes we'd wave to each other, and it was all good. And then I realized I'm getting a payoff. This is not empathy and empathic, pay it forward just for the sake of being kind and generous and whatever. I'm getting a payoff. So I moved it up a notch, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay it forward and drive off, and that's it, and not let it go, not think about it anymore. And so after a few months of doing that, I started to pay attention all over the place where I could be more empathic. So I have a very strong memory of being at Place Ville Marie during the holiday season around December at an Amex, a FedEx. Long queue, 2 people, felt like it was going slow. I was in such a bitchy mood, get to the counter, and the woman who treated me, serviced me, was rude, okay? And I remember my reaction was, oh yeah? In my head, yeah, you want to try that game with me? Okay, I'm ready, But I had the momentary thing of okay, is this an opportunity? Is this a moment where I can be more empathic? And I remember thinking, I asked her, this is all in a nanosecond of time, 2-3 nanoseconds. Sincerely I asked, are you okay? And in that little pregnant pause, and she felt that I was being sincere, and I wasn't asking are you okay? Right? Are you okay? She broke down. She started crying, and she's like, I have been working 2 double shifts. I got kids at home, they're sick. I've been working through bronchitis, it's crazy. Everybody's rude because of the season. Everybody wants their packages to go fast. She was crying. We were I was holding her hands. And I'm going to go get you a tea. You want a mint tea? Let's go, whatever. And we had a moment as human beings. Also, and I'll end on this, question, and I can go a few more minutes, but I don't want to keep you. I know it's exam time, but I'm happy to, answer more questions. But I remember while doing my PhD, I was in the Faculty of Education. So this is McTavish, and this is the education building. So it's almost at Penfield is here, and this is Pine. And there just so happened to be 7 or 8 parking spots that had no meters during that, in a particular, that year, okay, or up until recently, okay? And so I parked here, and as of 9 o'clock you were allowed. From 8 till 9 you were not allowed, so everybody stayed in their car, drinking their coffee, reading their newspaper. Sometimes the cops would show up. We all went around the block and came back to our spot. And then we had free parking for the day. These were sweet spots, okay? And my sister, who was doing her degree in law, had surgery. So she had rented a car, I don't know what exactly, but I knew she was going to park right behind me, and she was going to go to the hospital in the middle of the day, so the car was right outside waiting for her. So I held the spot. I physically got out of my car, and I stood in the final spot of that lineup of free parking spots. You know what I'm saying? And a woman, on a Monday morning, rolled up McTavish and beeped me out, and then I'm kind of making light of this. Tiananmen, the kid, she was ready to bulldoze me, okay? And she's screaming, okay? She rolled down the windows, and I mean, the blasphemy on a Monday morning, unheard of, okay? She was so, like violent in rage, okay, at me to get out of that I moved, obviously, like I didn't want to get run over by her vehicle. I got in my car and I was shaking. I was like, how did this person just like do that? And I was in my car and I was trying to read the newspaper and I was just reading the same paragraph over and over. I was just like coming off this thing, and there she was, standing right outside my car. I'm like, oh my God. She's like, can you please get out of the car? Like she's like asking me to get out of the car. And I'm like, oh my God, this woman is crazy. Like now she wants to like have a physical fight with me. And one of the things I had said to her in the altercation of her yelling at me, because I was basically initially saying like, I'm holding the spot for my sister who's having, I don't give a shit who you're, okay, like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, one of the things I said almost under my breath was, is this who you are on a Monday morning? But I didn't pay attention to that comment, okay? It's what came out. So she asked me to get out of the car, and I don't know why I did. She held my hands, and she said, this is not who I am on a Monday morning. And we ended up having like a 10-minute dialogue on the sidewalk. She was doing a PhD in child psychology, and she was from a small town in eastern Canada, and we stayed in touch, and 2 weeks later, she and her husband decided to move back because she was like, this is not who I am, and the city has made this who I am. So there are moments all the time available where you can tap into like the complexity of humanity, and when somebody shows up in the rottenness, that you can give them a space to be vulnerable and empathize. So you can practice. It was you that asked the question, Octave? So I've been practicing empathy, not flawlessly, but all the time. And I've become, and I mean this sincerely, I'm getting goosebumps, I sincerely say this, I'm a happier, healthier person. I'm in a joyous marriage, and I have a fabulous child, and I'm convinced it's because I've become more empathic over the last decade. You can have a better life if you become more empathic. We could have a better world. So I'll end on that note.